Jason Callahan. On the afternoon of June 26, 1995, two men were discovered dead in their Volkswagen van, having crashed into a set of trees on U.S. Route 58 West in Emporia, Virginia. Neither party present inside the vehicle was wearing a seatbelt, and it was later determined that this contributed to their deaths. The driver of the van was identified as Michael Hager, but the passenger could not be ID'd. On his person were two Grateful Dead tickets, one for June 24th and another for June 25th, several quarters, and a yellow Bic lighter. Near the scene, or possibly in John Doe's pocket, depending on the source, a letter was also recovered. At first, it seemed like a promising lead. It read, "Jason, sorry we had to go. See you around. Call me," followed by a phone no, and it was signed by Caroline T. and Caroline O. The letter also had on it a cartoonish drawing of a person, speculated to be Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead's lead vocalist. Unfortunately, though investigators looked into the phone number, it lacked an area code and ultimately led to no new evidence being discovered. The Carolines were never identified or spoken with. The Grateful Dead concert tickets, meanwhile, were traced shortly afterwards to a reseller, but he was unable to recall any details of the person he'd sold them to. John Doe remained unidentified for 2 decades, and in the meantime, he was referred to as Jason Doe or Grateful Doe. He was estimated to be between the ages of 15 and 21, with brown eyes and long curly hair that was either brown or dark blonde, but had been dyed a reddish shade. He had several tattoos that appeared to be done by an amateur, including a star on his upper left arm. His left ear was pierced, and there was a scar on the back of his neck. His teeth were well cared for, and there was no distinguishable dental work that had been carried out. At the time of his death, he was wearing a red tie-dyed Grateful Dead t-shirt, Levi brand jeans, white socks, and black Fila brand trainers. Upon identifying the driver of the van, Michael Hager, authorities began to suspect that Grateful Doe was a hitchhiker who'd been picked up between Fairfax and Gloucester, Virginia. Testing showed that neither man had drugs or alcohol in his system, which gave rise to the theory that Michael had fallen asleep at the wheel. Michael's family was spoken with following the crash, but they did not recognize his passenger, and to try and identify Grateful Doe, his fingerprints were taken and run through national databases, but no answers were found. As Grateful Doe had suffered lacerations to the face, a post-mortem photograph was not publicly released. Several facial reconstructions were made over the years, however, with the most notable being that which was published by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in 2012. Following the release of this image, over 220 missing people were ruled out as Grateful Doe. For years, there was much speculation about Jason Doe's identity. Users on the forum website Web Sleuths delved deep into the case, cross-referencing his image against that of dozens of missing persons cases. Redditors joined in on the action too, and in December of 2014, one woman, using the username @graymetal, posted a collage of Grateful Doe, including his 2012 reconstruction, the letter written by the Carolines, the t-shirt he was wearing, and other information, requesting that Redditors help her identify him. The image was widely circulated, and over 500,000 people were able to view it, eventually leading 2 individuals to come forward, believing that they recognized Grateful Doe and submitting a real photograph of him. These individuals were short-term roommates and were unable to recall anything beyond his first name, and that he may have been from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Redditors, including Gray Metal, along with others, began pushing the case into the mainstream spotlight, sending the information to TV stations and newspapers in the hopes that bigger media companies would be able to get more eyes on the story. Meanwhile, 63-year-old Margarita Evans stumbled across the images, either online or on the local news. The details differ depending on the source. Either way, she recognized the boy in the images immediately, and she went to report her son missing. She subsequently submitted her DNA for testing and waited. It would take nearly a year for the results to come back, and in December 2015, it was publicly announced that Grateful Doe had been identified as 19-year-old Jason Patrick Callahan. Jason had last been heard from in June 1995, shortly after leaving home to follow the Grateful Dead. Though Margarita had wanted to report her son missing earlier, she stated that she wasn't sure where to report him missing, given his nomadic lifestyle. When the family didn't hear from him for several years, they speculated that he'd start Nova and gone on to live on his own elsewhere. His half-sister, Shannon, told the media she was heartbroken by the news, stating Shannon had been another family member, to provide a DNA sample, so that authorities could conclusively prove that Jason Callahan was Grateful Doe. Following the identification of her son, Margarita joined in with the online sleuthing movement. She regularly posts images of missing children and maltreated animals to her Facebook and requests that her friends and family share the images in order to find some semblance of justice. Linda Pagano. By all accounts, 17-year-old Linda Pagano was shy, clever, and hardworking. She was a waitress at a local fast food restaurant, had a keen interest in rock music, and had grown up in Akron, Ohio, where she was still living in 1974. The youngest of 3 siblings, she shared an apartment with her older brother and sister and their stepfather at the time of her disappearance. Those who knew Linda found it difficult to reconcile that she would abandon her life and run away from home. But for years, that was the story her stepfather and investigators told. Linda was last seen by her siblings on August 31st, 1974. That evening, she attended a concert with her boyfriend, Steve Wilson, in Cleveland, and in the small hours of September 1st, the pair returned to Akron, where Linda dropped Steve off, and then went home. Notably, her stepfather Byron was the only person to see the 17-year-old upon her return. He would later state that the pair argued over the late hours that she would come and go from the house, and their argument escalated to such a degree that Byron threw Linda out of the house. She left the apartment and did not return. She was never seen again. Though the family were aware of Byron's bad temper, they did not believe anything was amiss, as he and Linda did not seem to be on bad terms before she disappeared. She was not immediately reported missing because her loved ones assumed she was staying with friends, but upon calling around and finding out that nobody had seen the 17-year-old, she was reported missing on September 2nd. Unfortunately, Linda's disappearance was largely dismissed by law enforcement, who believed that she was a runaway teen who'd stormed off after a family dispute and would return when she ran out of money. Shelter. Notably, Linda's car was still at the apartment. As a result of the police's lack of interest in the case, her disappearance was largely overlooked by the media, and for years, her disappearance remained a mystery. Less than 6 months later, on February 5th, 1975, partial skeletal remains were discovered on the banks of Rocky River in Strongsville, Ohio. Today, the area is part of the Mill Stream Run Reservation. The body was missing a jawbone, and there was little physical evidence that could be recovered by investigators. All law enforcement had to go on were the body's vitals. It was determined that the remains belonged to a white female around the age of 20, while her cause of death was established as a gunshot wound to the head. It was initially believed that the body belonged to Patricia Hearst, an actress and member of the wealthy and influential Hearst family. In 1974, she was kidnapped by the Siamese Liberation Army, and by the time the remains were found, it was unclear if she was alive or dead. Eventually, law enforcement ruled Patricia out of the investigation, as she was located alive 18 months after she went missing. Notably, Linda's brother, Michael, saw a news report about the recovery of the remains in Strongsville. He immediately called the Strongsville police force to tell them about his missing sister. But his theory was immediately dismissed. Authorities claimed that the body was too tall and too old to be Linda, and the Strongsville Jane Doe was later buried in an unmarked grave in Memorial Gardens, Highland Hills, Ohio. For decades, what had become of Linda remained unknown. Her family longed for answers, stuck in a hellish limbo where they wished to find some sense of closure, but could not. It wouldn't be until 2016. The 17-year-old's case would see movement again when Christina Skates, a Cleveland State University student, accidentally stumbled onto it while doing her genealogy research. Combing through cemetery records, Christina became aware of the unidentified skeletal remains in Memorial Gardens and subsequently requested access to the police files and autopsy records, feeling deeply saddened that a young woman had died and her case had been promptly forgotten. After doing further research, Christina laid out everything she knew in a Reddit post, where famed forensic artist Carl Koppelman caught wind of the case and drew up a reconstruction of the victim using images of her skull. Despite his efforts, the reconstruction struggled to gain any popular traction, and it largely went unnoticed by the public outside the sleuthing community. Carl Koppelman is a highly regarded volunteer forensic artist who works as an accountant by day and was never professionally trained in art. Shortly after the Strongsville Jane Doe caught his attention, he was sought out by law enforcement who wished to ask him about working with them on another case, and Carl decided to ask about the unidentified woman buried in a cemetery in Highland Hills. Around the same time, Christina sent an inquiry to law enforcement about the remains. She specifically asked why they did not appear on Cuyahoga County's list of unidentified remains, which was a crucial misstep by the police. Because she was not in the databases, nobody knew of her existence, and she could not be ruled out or matched to missing person cases. In the following months, new images of Jane Doe's skull were sent to Carl, who worked on another reconstruction, while authorities uncovered that a spelling error had prevented the remains from being added to online databases. This error was subsequently corrected, and the body was submitted to the NAMUS database, among others. Following this, the case unraveled quickly, as online sleuths suggested the remains were those of Linda, 17, and missing from Akron, Ohio, since September 1st, 1974. Shortly afterwards, Akron police reached out to authorities in Cuyahoga County, and the initial dental records seemed promising. A full exhumation was performed in October of 2017, so that DNA could be pulled from the remains, while DNA swabs were taken from Linda's siblings, Michael and Cheryl, for comparison. On June 29, 2018, it was confirmed that the body discovered in Strongsville, Ohio, in February of 1975, was indeed that of Linda Pagana. The remains were returned to the family for a proper burial, and Michael reportedly met with Christina Skates to give her his thanks for her hard work in bringing the case back to the attention of investigators. He later told the media, "I thought it was a dream. I thought this day would never come. I figured I'd die wandering. Though Linda has been found, her death remains unsolved." Some of her family members believe that their stepfather, Byron, may have been involved in her disappearance. Police consider him a person of interest, but he died in 1990 and cannot be questioned. Notably, Michael has stated that the pair were close, and he does not believe that their argument that night was anything more than a dispute between parent and child. Investigators are also keen to trace and speak with Steve Wilson, Linda's boyfriend at the time. Though he is not a suspect, he was one of the last people to see the 17-year-old alive, and is thus considered a key witness. Sergeant Jeff Smith, with the Akron Police, investigated Linda's case, stated that there was little to go on at the time of her disappearance, and even less now that Byron has died. He firmly believes that if the case had happened today, it would have been quickly solved thanks to modern technology and forensic advancements. He told reporters anyone with information about Linda's case or the whereabouts of her boyfriend in 1974, Steve Wilson, can contact the Cleveland Metro Parks Police Department at 440-331-5530. Jacob Wedeling. Sunday, October 22nd, 1989, was a bleak day for the Wedeling family, who lived in St. Joseph, Minnesota. Their 11-year-old son, Jacob, left home that night at around 9 p.m. to visit the local convenience store on his bike with his 10-year-old brother, Trevor, and their friend, 11-year-old Aaron Larson. After visiting the store where they rented a video copy of the spoof comedy film, The Naked Gun, the trio prepared to head home again, but were taken aback when a man obscuring his face with a stocking cap emerged from a nearby driveway carrying a gun. The assailant ordered the boys to throw their bikes into a ditch and lie face down on the ground. He subsequently demanded that they tell him their ages, then instructed Trevor to run to the nearby woods, assuring him that if he looked back, he would be shot and killed. Once Trevor was away from the scene, the man demanded to see the faces of Aaron and Jacob. He then instructed Aaron to run, threatening him the same way he had threatened Trevor. Jacob was never seen again. By the time the boys arrived home to alert the family and the police arrived at the crime scene, there was no sign of the 11-year-old or the unidentified man. Even though Jacob's abduction made headlines across the country and 2 eyewitnesses had seen the perpetrator, albeit with a somewhat obscured face, progress in the case was slow, and 20 years later, it had come to a steady halt. Though investigators had scoured through hundreds of tips and leads and spoken with dozens of witnesses and potential suspects, there was never anything solid to lead them to Jacob's whereabouts and the man who'd taken him from the street that night, leaving investigators and loved ones baffled and frustrated. By this time, Jacob's mother, Patty, had long since turned her attention to activism. She advocated and petitioned relentlessly for the parents of other missing children in the hopes that fewer people would have to suffer the same pain that she had since that horrific night in 1989. In 1990, Jerry and Patty Wetterling formed the Jacob Wetterling Foundation, an advocacy group for children's safety, and in 1994, they helped pass the Jacob Wetterling Act, which created a national sex offender registry. Meanwhile, Joy Baker, a former ad agency owner who ran a blog, had become greatly interested in Jacob's case. Joy was a mother of 2 boys herself, and Patty's pain resonated with her on a deep level. She lived just 45 minutes from the Wetterlings, and as she dived further into the case, she discovered that another boy had been taken from the streets and sexually abused by a man. In the nearby town of Cold Spring just 10 months before Jacob vanished, she tracked the boy, Jared Sherrill, down. He was now a fully grown adult, a 37-year-old working as a plumber, and admitted to having dreamt for years about finding his abuser and bringing him to justice. He told Joy that his abduction occurred on January 13th, 1989, and that the man who'd hurt him had brandished a gun in his direction, and later, when releasing him, told him to run and not look back, or else he'd be shot. The location of this incident was roughly 10 miles from where Jacob would later be confronted by his attacker. For Joy, this was not a coincidence. It couldn't be. She decided to look through the microfilm archives of the local newspaper in Paynesville, Minnesota, and eventually discovered yet more incidents of young children in the late 1980s being accosted by an unidentified masked man wielding a gun. Patty Wetterling recalled reading the blog for the first time and not knowing what to make of it, but she stated soon realized that she was asking questions nobody had. Joy firmly believed that investigators would not listen to her when she came forward with what she had discovered, so she asked Jared to step forward with what he knew first. In 2015, Jared's clothing that he'd worn the night he was attacked was retested, and the DNA led investigators to a man named Danny James Heinrich. Notably, he'd been questioned by the FBI in 1989 in connection with Jacob's case, and a DNA swab had even been taken, but he was never charged and was eventually released. Even more interestingly, a man who had dated his mother when he was a child, Dwayne Hart, who was also a convicted sex offender, claimed that he'd told police as early as 1991. He suspected Heinrich was involved in Jacob's disappearance, alleging that Heinrich had asked him how to dispose of a body. He also claimed to have seen suspicious items in Heinrich's home. This information was never correctly followed up on. The DNA from Jared's clothing was a positive match, and while Heinrich could not be charged in that case due to the statute of limitations expiring, law enforcement decided to use the evidence to issue a search warrant to look for incriminating evidence in his home, where they uncovered child sexual abuse material. He was arrested on October 28, 2015. Heinrich subsequently entered a plea agreement with investigators, which saw him lead them to Jacob's remains on September 1, 2016. He'd been buried about 30 miles from home, and his identity was confirmed using dental records. As part of his plea bargain, Heinrich would also plead guilty to 1 count of the 25 counts of federal child pornography charges brought against him and testify to the details of Jacob's death. He told the judge that he'd handcuffed Jacob and driven him to a gravel pit near Paynesville where he'd molested him, killed him, and buried his body. He had avoided the police that night by using a police scanner and had returned to the burial site a year later and moved the body because Jacob's jacket had become exposed. Heinrich also admitted during his court hearing that he had abused Jared in January of 1989. As part of the agreement, Heinrich was not charged with Jacob's murder. He was given 20 years in prison for the child abuse material charge, and further stipulations as part of the bargain may prevent him from ever being released from prison. Judge John Tunheim, who oversaw the case, stated that Heinrich will almost certainly never go free, noting, "This crime is so heinous, so brutal and awful. It is unlikely society will ever let you go free." And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own thoughts and reactions. And remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.